Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. Last time, we started talking about 10 aspects of the Pokemon games that have kept me a lifelong fan. But again, really not so much a fan as a prisoner. But in a good way, because as much as I'd like to say that I could leave anytime, that ain't happening. Pokemon's like a cult. But a good one that I actually don't want to leave. On second thought, that's probably exactly what actual cult members say.
All hail Lord Helix.
Anyway, if you haven't checked out part 1, it's linked in the description, and it covered the first 5 things that have kept me more infatuated with these games than a Tauros with a Miltank. That is, if the Tauros had twice the usual levels of testosterone and the Miltank used Attract. But today, I'm giving 5 more characteristics of these games that have not only kept me playing them for more than 25 years, but have made me a true lover of Pokemon, but not in the Tauros kind of way. Okay, let's just get into it. First up, and at number 6, we've got the mainline series' heavy emphasis on collecting, completing, sorting, and organizing. Okay, and I'll admit that this appeals to me for pretty obvious reasons. But the mainline Pokemon games at the end of the day are really all about completing the Pokédex. Well, actually, I'm not sure that I entirely agree with that. What do you mean, dude? You just said that. I know, but I'm entitled to change my mind. Dude, my mind is your mind. We're the same person. Well, maybe, but we're entitled to inner dialogue, aren't we? Well, I guess, but wait a minute. Are they seeing this right now? Recently, I've seen the term creature collector getting thrown around quite a bit to describe Pokemon and other games like it. But for me, the problem is that that's not exactly what Pokemon games are. Or at least not completely. Because while of course Pokemon can be and is defined by creature collecting, and in a big way, the collecting in Pokemon goes far deeper than just the creatures themselves. And I think this is part of what makes it so powerfully addictive. I mean, fun.
You gotta play to win!
With Pokemon, it's not just about grabbing one of the base forms of every species, throwing them in your PC boxes, getting your Pokedex completion certificate, and calling it a day. Not that you could complete the Pokedex in any game in one day. More like 3 months, with no sleep. But no, as I'm sure you all know, there's a lot more to it than that. First of all, like I mentioned in the part 1 video, there are many Pokemon that have more than one form. I mean, you've got gender differences, shinies, alternate forms, some species with multiple divergent evolutions, and the list goes on. But even more than that, you've got varying characteristics of individual Pokemon themselves, including moves, natures, IVs, EVs, and nowadays marks, ribbons, stamps indicating which game they originated from, what part of the world they were caught in, and all of that stuff. So just when you thought you were done, when it comes to Pokemon, no you ain't.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
That's too bad!
So yeah, you might have thought that all this was just about collecting all the things. But no, this ain't Donkey Kong 64.
Okay.
This is something far more sinister. I mean fun. This is about collecting all the things within the things, within the things, within the things. Within the things. And in case you were wondering just how deep this goes, I'll give you an example. Alchemy, the whipped cream Pokemon introduced in Sword and Shield, has a whopping 63 different forms, depending on what kind of sweet it's holding when it evolves, and what color it is, which varies with the time of day, and which direction and length of time that you spin in a circle. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And if all that whipped cream and spinning wasn't enough to make you throw up everything you've eaten in the last 3 years, this isn't even accounting for its Gigantamax form and all of its shinies. Yup. While shiny Alchemy is really always the same color, each of its 63 forms technically has a shiny. Now I can't do math, but calculators can, and mine's telling me that that's almost 130 different forms of Alchemy. Definitely enough to make your head spin and your inner completionist get a severe case of the sugar sweats.
Step back, I think I'm gonna vomit!
On a related note, and at number 7, we've got the depth and complexity of the Pokemon games. And given what we just talked about, this one should not be a surprise. And it's another one of those things that I wouldn't even attempt to fully cover in just one video. But the best place to start is probably Pokemon types, of which there are 18 total. Normal, fire, water, electric, grass, ice, fighting, poison, ground, flying, psychic, bug, rock, ghost, dragon, dark, steel, and fairy. Originally, there were 15, with Steel and Dark being introduced in Gen 2, and Fairy in Gen 6 to balance the disproportionate power of the Psychic and Dragon types respectively. But yeah, with each of these types having their own strengths and weaknesses, this children's game gets more complicated to navigate than a corn maze designed by MC Escher. At night. And it's full of velociraptors. And the velociraptors know Hyper Beam. Okay, I'll stop. Anyway, the 18 types alone would give Pokemon one of the most complicated battling systems of any game ever. But that ain't all. Because yeah, you guessed it, there are type combinations. Any given Pokemon can be up to 2 types. I joke about hating math and spreadsheets and all that stuff, but if I'm honest, there's a corner of my autistic brain that loves this crap. Because it's patterns and lining things up and accounting for the huge amount of possibilities that all of these factors bring about. If including monotypes, as of this video, there are 162 different type combinations currently in use, with just 9 that haven't been used yet. Those being normal ice, normal bug, normal rock, normal steel, fire fairy, ice poison, ground fairy, bug dragon, and rock ghost. And with new type combinations being added all the time, all the way up until Gen 9, and the Pokemon Company apparently at least being open to a future with up to 10,000 Pokemon, you can bet that these unused type combinations are just about as inevitable as the ultimate heat death of the universe. But with each type combination having its own unique set of strengths and weaknesses that are more complex than just single types, the possible matchups might as well be endless. For instance, water type Pokemon, which are by far the most common at 78 total species, are weak to grass and electric. Electric as a single type is weak only to ground, and ground is weak to both water, grass, and ice. This could go on all day, and that's just with single typings. With a dual type, like let's say water and dragon, each of the 2 types' strengths and weaknesses have to be considered together. In this case, with water resisting fire, water, ice, and steel, and dragon resisting fire, water, electric, and grass, a Pokemon like Walking Wake, or Dinosaur Suicune as I like to say, is twice as resistant to fire because both of its types resist it individually. And the same goes for water. However, because water doesn't resist dragon and dragon is weak to dragon, dragon remains a weakness. But where ice would ordinarily be super effective against dragon, in this case it would hit for neutral damage because water resists ice. And this is just looking at the types of Pokemon. There's also their moves. And each move has its own type and can either be physical or special, or inflict a status condition, or change the dynamic of battle in some other way. Many Pokemon can learn moves that don't belong to one of their types, which can actually be very strategic given the situation. And as of Gen 9 in Scarlet and Violet, there's also terastallization, which gives Pokemon the ability to change their types entirely in battle. This opened the door for an entirely new dimension of complexity for a system that was already extremely complicated. Plus, as just mentioned in number 6, there's also the individual characteristics of each individual Pokemon. Namely, their natures, individual values or IVs, and effort values or EVs, which affect their capabilities in even more ways. And I'll be the first to admit that even as a lifelong fan, I still struggle to remember all this stuff, even just basic type matchups. And I'm the kind of person who's good at retaining this kind of information. And that's not bragging, I also usually can't tell you what freaking day of the week it is. This is really just scratching the surface of the massive layers upon layers that Pokemon has, but hopefully it conveys what should be obvious to anybody who's actually played the games. While they might be marketed to kids, there's enough complexity here to keep a mathematician, statistician, astrophysicist, and 16th century philosopher busy for 1,000 lifetimes. Next up, in contrast to Pokemon's complexity, we've also got its simplicity. Now I know what you're thinking, that don't make no sense. And maybe it doesn't, but hear me out, because I think this holds true. At the same time that Pokemon is immensely complex, it's also surprisingly and refreshingly simple. Because even with the massive amount of variables that we just talked about in number 7, there's nothing that says that you have to worry about that. It's kind of like what I was saying in the Habits That Ruin Your Love for the Games video. If the vast depth and complexity of typings and stats and all that stuff stresses you out, or if you're someone who doesn't understand it or doesn't care to, like a 7-year-old, the games aren't forcing you to play them a certain way. If you want to use a Charmander or Pikachu against Brock's Onix and win after 2 hours of brute force, you're welcome to do so. If you don't want to worry about optimal natures and perfect IVs and just the right move set and all of that, you don't need to. Because most story playthroughs are easy enough that you can enjoy the plot, the characters, the creatures, the regions, and the battles without all that other stuff. And here's what's cool. It's the juxtaposition of that complexity and simplicity that makes Pokemon so unique and so appealing to such a vast number of different people, regardless of age or skill level. And here's what I mean. Let's say you're a little kid playing Yellow for the very first time. You may not know that the first gym would be much easier with a Nidoran with double kick or Mankey with low kick, which they both learn upon leveling up. You may not even know that those Pokemon or those moves exist, but you might have caught a Pidgey and Pidgey knows Sand Attack. So instead of doing the right thing, you just spam Brock with Sand Attack. And therefore his rock moves can't hit, and it earns you the badge. While we might look at this now as dumb or unnecessary, it's really how we all learned. And it exposes us to new strategies and ways to play that we wouldn't have otherwise. By the way, I use that example of Sand Attack because that is exactly what I did as a kid. And it might have been stupid, but I'll be darned if I didn't have a good time. Kinda like when you get a 4-year-old a big expensive electronic toy and they ditch it to play with the box instead.
Whoopee! Another box!
While our jaded adult brains might look at that as an insult, it's really just a kid being a kid, using their imagination and having fun. And again, that's what Pokemon is about. If you want to be a competitive player with an encyclopedic knowledge of stats, go right ahead. If you'd rather just enjoy the ride and play with your favorites, that's great too. Neither is objectively the right way to play. It's what you make of it, and that's another huge reason why Pokemon is so amazing. At number 9, we've got the plot, characters, and themes of the Pokemon games. Okay, so before you drop a comment saying, Pokemon games plots are weak sauce, let me finish. I recognize that the stories of Pokemon games, generally speaking, aren't overly sophisticated, especially when comparing to other more grown-up RPGs. And by the way, personally, I don't think that Pokemon is for kids. Or at least not in the sense that it's just for kids. Appeal to kids and adults aren't mutually exclusive categories, but I digress. So here's my take on this. For those of us that have played these games since we were 7 or 8 years old, the plots were good at the time. Going on a huge adventure to catch them all and become the best trainer in the world, all while foiling the schemes of a criminal organization, was more than enough to keep us fully captivated at the time. And in Gold and Silver, the themes got a little more complex, while remaining simple enough. I'd argue the exact same for Gens 3 and 4. And I think there's a case to be made that Pokemon games have overall struck a pretty good balance of evolving with the times while remaining true to their roots, though I realize I'm likely in the minority on that. But regardless, to judge Pokemon games entirely by plot is to miss the point. The ability to enjoy a game or series of games is not determined solely by their stories. If that was the case, Tetris and Minecraft would be shovelware, not the best-selling video games of all time. Now, do Pokemon games have plots? Sure. Are they immune to criticism? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. My point is that, unlike many armchair video game critics would have you believe, the stories of Pokemon games are just one element of their many, many more notable characteristics, and a relatively minor one at that. Do I happen to really enjoy Pokemon game stories? I do, actually. Is that the primary reason that I'm still hooked? No, not really. Don't get me wrong, the worlds, characters, even the human ones, and lore of these games have moments that still give me goosebumps. I mean, honestly, running in the red on Mount Silver should have a trigger warning for overly excitable asthmatics. Or encountering Rayquaza at Sky Pillar after it saves the world from a cataclysm of biblical proportions. Or Giratina dragging Cyrus into the distortion world. And there are so many other amazing examples. And while we're at it, let me know what some of your favorite story moments are in a comment below. But what I'm getting at is this. Pokemon doesn't need Tolstoy level plots to be enjoyable, because the plots are really just a means of introducing you to the vast list of creatures and endless possibilities that really define the games more than a single story ever could. And that gets us to number 10, the last thing on this list, and really something that I've already touched on throughout this video. And it's one of Pokemon's greatest aspects, its wide open sense of what could be, its possibilities, or maybe better defined as its mystery. Some might view this as defending the game's deficits. Like, how could something that the games don't have, as in features that we haven't seen yet, be a good thing? Here's my response to that. From day one, Pokemon has been defined by not necessarily just what you see in game, but what you don't see. Name one other game series that spawned more playground rumors and internet forum speculation than Pokemon. These so-called kids games have been the subject of more arguing and theorizing than the origin of life on Earth. Hey, isn't it crazy that ultimately I'm just Stardust, the product of random chance and millions of years of natural selection?
No, you ain't.
I'm of the belief that for everything that's said by a work of art, whether a brushstroke in a painting, a note in a musical composition, a scene in a film, or a line of code in a game, there's just as much power, if not more so, in what isn't overt. It's in the liminal space, in the silence, in what's left to the imagination, that can take something from entertaining to truly profound. It's why in any good horror movie, for example, the big bad isn't really visible until the very end. It's why in the case of Pokemon, the genetically engineered monster that escaped from Cinnabar Island is often foreshadowed, alluded to, but not encountered until well after your journey is essentially over. Because by the time you quote-unquote complete the game and wander into that dark corner where Mewtwo resides, it leaves you wondering, what else could be out there? What else did I miss? What else is possible? And it's that sense of what could be, whether within one game or the series in general, that puts Pokemon games in their own category. They're constantly changing, constantly introducing new mechanics and new secrets to uncover. So it's about more than, man, I wonder what this next game's all about. It's I wonder what potential this next game unlocks, and what that potential might mean for the next game after that, and the one after that. That's not something that many games have, and I'm convinced that it's a big reason why Pokemon is the most valuable media franchise in human history, and also one that I've been in love with for my entire life. So there you have it, 10 things that have kept me a Pokemaniac since day one. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave me a like or subscribe if you're so inclined. And comments are welcomed. Is there anything on this list that you agreed with? Is there anything that you disagreed with? Was there anything that made you think? Feel free to let me know your thoughts as we continue to grow this community of fellow Pokemon fans. As always, I sincerely appreciate you watching, and I'll see y'all next time. All the things within the things within the things within the things within the things.